if you hear those noises, that's my brother taking out my dog. Anyway. Excuse me, guys. My video is playing. I was watching some Lego stop motions earlier this morning. Anyway. Today's video is about Tanarian history. And basically in this video, we're going to break down the country Tanaria's history. Who were the leaders, what government systems they were, what wars they were involved in, and what was the outcome of that war. Now, and if you heard that, that was my brother with the door. Anyway, so, first off, today's video, we're going to be talking about Tanarian history. Next week, or sometime next week, I'll be talking about Tanarian history. Then I'm going to make another suggestion video on 3 different countries that you want to learn about. Also, if you don't want to do that, then I got a new project for you. You see, I have made wars previously, and I was talking about one of them, which was the Marlandustian War. And if you want, I'll make a post, or not post, but more likely a suggestion video about a series of wars that you want me to cover. And if you want me to, I can do one of those, or if you want me to do... I actually will do one of them because I don't like multitasking. So I will do that later this afternoon. And I would like to see you guys' reply. Anyway, so the origin of Tanaria was a colony for the country of Tasmania during the Aryan invasion of Latopia. Their main leader was Sir Mukrek of Tasmania, but the first leader of the Tanarian colony itself was General Doom. General Doom and Sir Mukrek were friends, and they both had a really good relationship as friends. And since Mukrek was the main leader, General Doom was the second in command and general of his military forces. So when they began to colonize Plastopia, General Doom was in charge of the colony, while Sir Mukrek was in charge of the whole country and the colony. Tanaria over the years, Part 1. After the end of the invasion of Latopia, the Tans were given a new order from their main leader, Sir Mukrek, to invade the Greentopian colony, Greenland. On November 30th, 2011, the invasion of Greenland began. General Doom's and Tasmania and Sir Mukrek's first victory was the capture of Fort Greene, which angered the Greenlandians and became a huge war. Now, I have little detail of how the Green and Tan War started, but I will tell you how it started with Fort Greene. You see, one morning, Greens were doing their natural routine of patrolling their bases and getting ready. The Tanarians, out of nowhere, arrived at their destination and began to open fire and bombard the fort from 9:30 in the morning to 11 o'clock. So basically a total of 2 hours, to 1 o'clock or so. Either way, they were bombarded for 4 hours and had heavy casualties, and the general of that fort later surrendered to the Tanarians because they didn't want to lose any more men and didn't want to die in vain for not defending their fort. And they did do their best to defend their fort, but they had less men and they had no choice but to surrender. And after this incident, it angered the whole Greenland, the Green Nation itself. And that's how the Green and Tan War started. If you want to go into more detail, every other country has a different story of the Green and Tan War told. So I will do that individually later. Anyway, for the next 9 years, the Tans and Greens have fought against each other with their allies and themselves. General Doom surrendered to the Greens on May 3rd, 2020. Since then, the Tanarians have remained in peace. And speaking of which, guys, on May 3rd this year, I'm going to be making a memorial video for my armament nations if you guys want. And I know that you guys don't know about this stuff, which is why I'm telling you about it now. And that's my brother calling my dog, our dog. Anyway, let's continue with the video. So, tonight over the years for part 2. On May 16, 2020, the Reds began to attack the nation of Tanarian because one of their soldiers killed their leader. This was known as the Red Invasion. It lasted a day because the leader and the assassins were caught and were put to trial for the crimes, which basically was a one-day. It would be a big war if no one did something, but luckily they did something and it ended the war pretty quickly. The Tanarians began to help Greenland and the other nations defend the country of Plastopia from the galactic forces during the war known as the New Age of Warfare, which was a war between the galactic forces invading their country while the armament nations were defending theirs. And the leaders made a wager saying that if the galactics win, they could take their land, and if the armament wins, they have to leave. And it resulted with the armament winning and the galactic forces leaving. So, yeah. Next. In the month of August, the nation of Tanarian was under attack by Tsar Mukrek. Mukrek was angry that Doom failed to conquer Greenland and decided to attack the colony and have him in custody, which resulted in a civil war known as the 10 Civil War. Now, just to be fair, this isn't their first civil war. The second Civil War would come a year or so later, and you're going to understand why that war started here in a bit. But right now, we're worried about the second part over the years. This is the beginning to the middle of Tanaria of what it is today. The people of Tasmania wanted Doom won the war, and Tsar Mukrek was overthrown, which meant Tsar Mukrek is alive. He's not dead, but even though they were both friends, Mukrek wanted Doom to follow his orders and wanted him to win for their country, but Doom failed to do so. That's why they had a fight. And Doom won and made sure that he would be alive, but he would never be the new leader because of how power hungry he was and how dictated he was, because he was a dictator. And the people, Doom had enough following his orders because his orders led to their losses in the first place. So that's how that happened. Anyway, the people of Tasmania, after that little war, wanted Doom to be their new leader since he overthrew Mukrek, but he refused the offer and instead put a soldier by the name of Yuri to take place as the new leader of Tasmania while he was leader of Tanaria, which later he went from General Doom to Tsar Doom of Tanaria. Now, also guys, during this time, Tanaria and Tasmania are still bonded together, and even though they may have two separate leaders, they still are connected in some way. Tanaria over the years, part 3. Tanaria was still allies with Greenland and the other two nations, and they helped with Greenland's fight against the Latvian rebels during the Latvian invasion campaign. When the beginning of the Great Armament War started, Tanaria wanted to help Moscow to gain their independence, and also in return gain their independence from Tasmania, while Greenlandians were fighting for their independence from Greentopia, which made Tasmania angry and had to fight their own people again. And this time, when the Plastopian forces won, Tasmania, Greenland, Utopia, and the other nations got their independence from the Tanarian Islands. Anyway, let me think. Or let me find a place where to... Yeah, The Tanarians were part of the council program during the negotiation war, but they get involved in the combat because you see, they don't see fit to be involved with a war or a argument with three nations that would result into a war where they would be picking multiple sides, and they don't want to be that, so they remained out of that war. They also helped defend the countries of Tenyo during the second invasion of the Galactic Forces, and this was the exact same scenario from the first Galactic invasion, but it was no wager. It was just a plain invasion, and the Armin forces defending. Tanarian became an ally to the Tanarian during the Second World War Plastic. The reason why they wanted to be an ally with Tanarian was because they had a massive army, and that's true because back then Tanarian had over 700 and something troops. Tanarian only had 600 troops, and they looked up to them because they knew that if they teamed up, they would be powerful and they would invade other nations without no problem. But they also forgot that Greenland is still powerful than them, and this would really result with their failure. But the reason why they became allies with Tanarian is because Doom wanted to spread communism in the first place during the Green Terran War, and Tsar Retov's goal was to spread communism throughout the whole world. So he, Tsar Doom, and Tsar Retov had the same idea and became good friends and allies. And after the war was over and Tanarian surrendered, Doom, who was his ally, and Retov were killed on the same day, which was on Valentine's Day of 2020. And the reason because of this is because they thought that if they could kill the leaders and replace it with someone else, they won't have to involve with the situation. But then again, this would be their mistake and their resolution. Tanarian over the years, Part 4. A year later after Doom's death, his right-hand man, General Tannenberg, will be the new Tsar of Tanarian. And guys, if you hear that noise, that's my dog. She's eating her dog food, so sorry there's a lot of noises going on in this video, but natural routine. Anyway, will be the new Tsar of Tanarian. Tannenberg's goals were to gain revenge on the Greenlandians for killing their leader and mistreating them after the Green Terran War. He also wanted to do a better job of taking Greenland on his own and prove himself to the world that he's better than Doom. Now, if you're wondering why Tannenberg wanted revenge on Greenland, well, let me tell you a semi-social thing between Greenland and Tanarian. Since the Green Terran War, the Greens and the Tans were kind of discriminate and had hatred towards each other. And there's a ton of reasons why. They were enemies, rivals, arch enemies, especially against Tanarian, because Tanarian invaded their country, and Greenland hated the way that the Tanarians were showing. So they still, and even though they were allies, they were not actual allies. They were just pretending to be allies to avoid everyone else from going into war with each other. But when the Second World War Plastic came, that is when Greenland had enough. And this is where they took their actions and killed Tsar Doom because of their hatred towards Tanarian. And they thought that the leadership was from Tsar Doom, so they killed Tsar Doom. And then when Tannenberg took over, he saw the opportunity and the advantage to gain revenge. And let me tell you something. When it comes to war, there's different types of scenarios. Some wars result in peaceful situations. Some wars result to unfair situations which will lead to another war. And that's what would happen now. So, anyway, let's continue. His invasion began on June 25th, 2021. From the beginning, he was doing well, but in the middle to the end of the war, he failed and would later put his nation under occupation because of his actions. And the reason why he failed was because, you see, Greenland in this universe is a representative of the United States. The reason why the United States is the most impossible country to ever be conquered is because everyone has a right to defend themselves. Not to mention the terrain is a mix between dry, wet, swampy, and cold. And the reason because of that, if you have four different types of terrains and landmarks in the same. Mitri, the dog is whining. Can you take her out?
I took her out. I just took her out. She's missing a paw. That's what's the matter.
Okay, sorry. And sorry, guys, my brother's here, and the reason why he's here is because he's sick. He's not in school, but he is waiting for more assignments to come up. Anyway, so the reason why they failed was because since the terrain was difficult to navigate, it had the Greenlandians' advantage to use guerrilla tactics against them. And guerrilla tactics in most wars does the trick in winning, and that's what happened. And there has been a ton of history reports of guerrilla tactics used in warfare. And I'm not going to go into detail into that, but it's true though. So anyway, Sergeant Tannenberg was also killed by a firing squad on July 16th, 2021. Because you see, they didn't want Tanarian to rise up against them again, so they killed their leaders, their second leader, Tannenberg, and this time put them in occupation. And the MIPR Council, which stands for Army International Peace Association recommendation, made a law where Greenland can occupy the country of Tanarian until the damage in their country was repaired, since they had bad beef and since they caused a lot of damage from the First War. So they basically did not own them like slaves, but they did only occupy their country until their damage was repaired, which resulted with them having free labor in order to achieve some kind of peace. And it's very weird. And I know that to you guys is like slavery, and it's really not. It's just I don't like slavery. I'm trying not to make it look like it sounds like slavery, but then again, it sounds like slavery, and it's not really. But to you guys, it is. And here's the good part and the bad part about that: the Tanarians can work and live on their own, and every time they do their work, they do get rewarded with food, supplies, and whatever. But if they hesitate or they refuse, there will be terrible consequences. And yeah, no one wants to know about that, and that will be a different time. Anyway, and also, even though Greenland occupied them, they took 10% of everything they owned, which would be either half or a quarter of what they got. And that was kind of an outrage to Tanarian, but it had to be done. So in order for them to be free from this occupation, they had to do what they had to do, and that was help Greenland prepare its country to avoid more conflicts. And this would later result in a debate between two generals that would fight for the future of Tanarian. The Tanarians were let go of Greenland's supervision on October 6, 2021. After 3 months since they were let go of the occupation, the nation Tanarian was still deciding if the government could be changed from communism to democracy and who would be the new leader. The two parties for Tanarian's government were the TDA, which stands for Tanarian Democratic Agency, run by General Tranif, and the TCGA, stands for Tanarian Communist Group Association, run by General Tara. Tara was the second command for both Doom and Tannenberg. He was tired of being second and wanted to be leader of the country. He also wanted revenge on the Greens for forcing them to do free labor. And he does have a point. They didn't do free labor, and they were sick and tired of the free labor. Tranif wanted to be allies with Greenland instead of being an enemy to them. Because, you see, the more times Tanarian was at war with Greenland, the more they would lose all the time. because Greenland is more powerful. They have more resources than Tanaria. Tanaria has a limited amount of men, a limited amount of vehicles, and a limited amount of resources. So therefore, if they were to war again, it would result in Greenlandian winning and Tanaria losing again. So Traneth wanted to make allies with Greenland to avoid future wars and to be on their good side than to be on the bad side, because they always had that beef from the beginning. And Traneth was sick and tired of the discrimination, the racism, and the Traneth was sick and tired of the racism, discrimination, and the tyranny of his leaders before him. So he wanted to make allies with Greenland to avoid bad blood and to avoid rivalry, and rather becoming one as whole and become friends for once, so that when they needed each other, they would help each other out, than fighting and killing each other over and over again. And this is where the Tanarian Civil War began. So, as I was saying, Trevor wanted to be honest with Greenland instead of being an enemy to them. He also would like the country to be democratic because he was tired of leaders thirsting for revenge and power around the world. This would later result in a civil war between Traneth and Tara. This was known as the Tanarian Civil War. In the end of the Civil War, Traneth won with the help of the Greenlandian troops and became the president of Tanarian and changed the government from communism to democracy. During the middle of the Equality War, it was the first time that Tanarian and Greenland worked together to defeat Rushlavik's invasion. Since then, Tanarian remained loyal to Greenland and vowed not to betray their alliance, to avoid more collision from the first two wars. Their final war was the communist invasion. They did their best defending their country from Rushlavik's forces, but then were captured and forced to fight for him until he was killed and were let go from his oppression. Since then, Tanaria remained democratic and will be to the end, and communist social groups were banned by the end of the Equality War to avoid more powers. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I just want to say thank you so much for supporting my channel. Stay tuned for next week, because next week will be the Tanarian history and